Psychology wasn't always about what you see today, therapy couches and complex brain scans. It actually started as the study of the soul. So let's trace this incredible journey of how it became a science and explore the massive, revolutionary ideas that completely changed how we understand ourselves.
It really all kicks off with a question that I'm sure you've asked yourself a million times. Why on earth do I do the things I do, right? Why do we feel a certain way or make one choice over another? That basic human curiosity, well, that's the engine that has driven the entire history of psychology.
And if you look at the word itself, psychology literally means the study of the soul. Now, people have been thinking about the soul for thousands of years, but the actual science of psychology, it's surprisingly young. It didn't really get going until the late 1800s.
And that's where our story really takes off. Not in some ancient philosopher's study, but in a laboratory. This was the moment psychology decided, okay, I'm going to be a science.
So it all boils down to these two key moments. In 1879, a guy named Wilhelm Wundt opens the very first formal psychology lab over in Germany. And then just 4 years later, Stanley Hall brings the whole operation to America, setting up a lab at Johns Hopkins. And with that, the starting gun had been fired.
So, what were these brand new scientists arguing about? Well, it probably wasn't what you think. The very first big fight was about something fundamental, the nature of consciousness itself. What even is it, and what's it for?
And this led to the first big split in the field. On one side, you had the structuralists. They tried to map the mind by breaking it down into its tiniest little parts, kind of like taking apart a clock to see how all the gears fit together. But on the other side, you had the functionalists. They thought that was completely pointless. They didn't care about the gears. They wanted to know what the clock does. What's the purpose of our thoughts? For them, consciousness wasn't some static machine, it was a flowing stream.
But while all these labs were busy debating the nuts and bolts of conscious thought, a doctor over in Vienna was about to turn the entire field completely upside down by looking at what was hiding just beneath the surface.
This was Sigmund Freud's big, revolutionary, and, let's be honest, pretty unsettling idea, that we are not really the masters of our own minds. He came to believe that the real drivers of our personality and our behavior are hidden from us, buried deep down in a part of the mind he called the unconscious.
So, according to Freud, this unconscious mind is this deep well of forgotten memories, secret desires, and all these urges we don't want to admit we have. We're not aware of them, but they are constantly influencing our thoughts, our dreams, and our actions. For Freud, the person you think you are is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Now, as you can probably guess, not everyone was a fan of these, unprovable ideas about a hidden mind. So a whole new movement popped up that wanted to drag psychology out of the shadows and back into the world of observable, measurable science. This was the rise of behaviorism.
The behaviorists' whole philosophy was simple and, frankly, uncompromising. Led by guys like John B. Watson, they basically said that if you can't see it, measure it, and verify it, it has no place in psychology. And that meant thoughts, feelings, and the entire idea of the unconscious mind were completely thrown out the window.
For the behaviorists, this was it. This was the only thing psychology should study, observable behavior. They weren't interested in what was going on inside the black box of the mind. They argued that who we are isn't shaped by some hidden desires, but almost entirely by our environment. B.F. Skinner took this idea and ran with it. His principle was incredibly simple but also really powerful. We are shaped by consequences. If you do something and the outcome is good, you'll probably do it again. If the outcome is bad, you won't. And here's the radical part. For Skinner, this means free will is just an illusion. Our behavior is just the sum total of all our past rewards and punishments. This intense focus on the environment, this idea that we are made, not born, it really pushed one of psychology's biggest debates right into the spotlight. Nature versus nurture. Are we just a product of our DNA, or are we entirely shaped by our life experiences? But pretty soon, another group showed up that was unhappy with both of the big ideas out there. They felt Freud was way too focused on the negative stuff, and that the behaviorists basically treated people like programmable robots. It was time for a change, the humanist revolt. And this really captures their whole vibe. Humanists argued that the other approaches were just dehumanizing. They insisted that we are not just puppets controlled by our unconscious or our environment. We are conscious beings with hopes, dreams, and the freedom to choose our own path.
So humanism, led by people like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, offered this new, really optimistic perspective. It focused on what makes us uniquely human, our freedom, our creativity, and our deep desire for personal growth, what they called the journey towards self-actualization, which is really just about becoming the best possible version of yourself.
Okay, so as we fast forward into the more modern era, the field of psychology just kept evolving, this time getting its inspiration from brand new technology and some really fresh ways of thinking about our deep, evolutionary past.
See, with the invention of computers, psychologists suddenly had this powerful new metaphor for the human mind, and this sparked what we call the cognitive revolution. The basic idea was that our brain is like the hardware, and our mental processes, our thoughts, are like the software that runs on it.
This brought the focus right back inside the head, but in a very scientific way. Cognitive psychology studies the rules of the mind. You know, how we think, how we remember things, solve problems, and process all the information coming at us. And then, another perspective came along and added a whole new layer. Evolutionary psychology takes all those cognitive rules and asks an even deeper question. Where did those rules even come from? The main idea here is that our mental processes were shaped over thousands and thousands of years by natural selection to help our ancestors survive and reproduce. Phew! So after this wild journey through all these competing ideas, from the unconscious to observable behaviors, from free will to mental software, what does it all mean today? What does the psychologist actually do?
Well, the field has become incredibly diverse. A clinical psychologist today might use ideas from Freud or the humanists in therapy. A neuropsychologist is literally studying the brain's physical hardware, and an industrial psychologist might apply behaviorist principles to make a workplace more productive. Pretty much every specialty today pulls from this rich and often conflicting history.
And that really brings us to the final thought. So, what about you? Are you driven by unconscious desires you don't understand? Are you shaped by your environment and your past rewards? Are you a free agent striving to reach your full potential? Or is your mind just running on ancient, evolutionary software? After more than a century of debate, the question is still on the table. Which one of these powerful ideas best explains you?